Also, Xbox 360 called. They want their mic back. They, I guess he's gone. He couldn't handle it. That burn was so much. He just
I hate technology. So hello everyone, and welcome to Pigeon Screen. This is a book club about books that are adapted to movies, and a movie club about movies adapted from books. I'm Calvin, and Anne Shirley is my bosom friend. Hi, my name's Ashton, and I think adults in the late 1800s were kind of dicks.
So I'm Doug, and I hope they bring back elocution.
Hi, I'm Jesse, and I wish I read this earlier.
Today, we are discussing Anne of Green Gables. Anne of Green Gables, the novel, was written by Lucy Maud Montgomery and published in 1908. And Anne of Green Gables, the adaptation by CBC, came out in 1985, and it was directed by Kevin Sullivan. We're going to hop right into the book. How did we feel about this Canadian classic?
I kind of wish I had read this book when I was younger. There's just a lot of stuff in it that, as a kid, I felt it would have related to me more hearing just the way Anne is interacting with the world, and especially how she's got a very hyperactive imagination. And as a kid, I was always told that. So I think maybe as a kid, I would have associated, just kind of growing up, I would have loved the book a lot more. I mean, I do love the book, but I just feel like I really wish I had read this as a kid.
So I chose this for the group because I was planning on going to Eastern Canada eventually. Like, it was kind of, I always try to plan big trips into the future, and Prince Edward Island was on that trip. So I decided to read the book, and I figured since we're doing this podcast already that, you guys might as well read it too. But I enjoyed it probably as much as I hoped I would. Like I was already going to pick up the book expecting to enjoy it, but it ended up being a really beautiful book, coming of age, and it showed me a perspective, because the thing is I tend to read either nonfiction or science fiction, and they're almost always, and by almost always I mean I can't think of a single instance where it wasn't done by male authors. And so this was kind of like the first time I stepped out of that genre, and I enjoyed it immensely.
Same thing for me too. Like when Doug suggested it, like this was never really a book I ever thought to myself that I needed to read. And like I got about a third into the book and I was like, oh geez, I'm not sure if I'm like really into this yet. And then when I got about halfway through, I was like, okay. And then I got interested, and I really did enjoy it by the time I was finishing it up. But yeah, typically speaking, as far as the genre itself, this was just not on my radar, something that I thought I would even care to read in the future. And it's really good to be able to broaden my horizons with this. But overall, I really did enjoy the book quite a bit.
Same with me for the most part. I've just in general been reading a lot more books this year, period. So, and I kind of set the goal for myself at the start of the year that I'm going to just read everything and not limit myself to any one genre. But yes, for the majority of the part, I think science fiction and horror are probably the things I more likely lean towards. So it was cool to read something that had none of those elements and was just such an absolute everyday kind of story. And it's actually interesting. I think this goes to say more about the adaptations that I've watched of it. But even in the book, there's almost no conflict in the entire book. And I think normally I would think that doesn't sound that interesting, but there's something so calming about that. I compare it to something like Breaking Bad or something else where watching the thing will make you more tense, and watching this thing or reading this thing is going to give you anxiety. and Anne of Green Gables is the absolute opposite of that. It's pure escapist fiction in the best sense, because it's like, yeah, I at no point felt anxious or anything. Like, I loved picking up the book because I loved having this like really chill read to come back to every once in a while.
Like, I kind of felt kind of in the same sense. You know how you and then this is just how I would put it. My brain kind of does like a video games thing, where when you're playing a co-op video game, but it's a video game where you're not against each other, where you're trying to build something like a Minecraft or something. I felt that as like a reader, you were kind of in that same sense, because everybody joined on the side of Anne early on in the book and was like hoping that she would be a success, or like her life would be better. And through the entire book, you're everybody's pulling in that same direction.
Mm-hmm.
And like, yeah, there's no real antagonist other than maybe like Josie Pye, who shows up.
Yeah.
And like this book should just be called 101 Reasons Why Josie Pye is a total jerk for some reason. But I don't know. I really enjoyed it because it just felt like as a bachelor male, I felt like I was taking the viewpoint of Matthew pretty much in every instance, where he and it's a little bit different because kind of the people who read this book can't really say, oh, I'm an older single man reading this book. And so as I'm reading it, I'm putting myself in Matthew's shoes to the point where I almost feel like I'm Matthew as I'm reading it, and I'm just like watching this relationship between Marilla and Anne develop in front of me. I that's partially one of the reasons I really enjoyed the book.
Yeah, like Matthew's character is actually really interesting because he's almost a non-character. He's in it for such a small portion of it. And it's weird because I think like at first I didn't quite like him that much. The fact that like he didn't want a girl, and like he had this like innate fear of women and stuff when he was like going to pick her up. I was like, all right, so he's just a loser. Like, I don't understand like what this dude's thing is. I think by the end of the book, like you really do kind of get this sense of like it's a very refreshing male character for starters, because Matthew just has such a wholesome father-daughter relationship with her, because I feel like so often you'll see those relationships portrayed as the father being overprotective of the daughter, and that can be pretty toxic, whereas like that's never Matthew's thing. Like he's always like super supportive of her, and like it's like made fun of and stuff like that, but it's like it's always endearing. Yeah, it's an interesting like lens, and you're right. I don't know how many older single men are reading this book and relating to it. But that's also one of the reasons why I like it so much, is because it is something that like I wouldn't necessarily pick up, and it's a viewpoint I wouldn't necessarily have. But there are so many instances reading it where I was like, I think of when I first read Harry Potter, and I feel like probably a lot of people had the same reaction when they were reading Harry Potter growing up, is that this was this character that a lot of kids, a lot of young boys probably saw themselves as, and I'm sure there are a lot of those characters for boys, and there probably are a lot of those for girls. This book is probably so important. Like it's probably such an important piece of literature for young girls to read, because Anne is such a like, I guess, abnormal character, and I think being a young girl reading that and being like, oh, like I can be as silly as she is.
I want to build upon that point when I told my mom I was reading Anne of Green Gables, and like she got super excited when I could talk to her about characters when I was done the book. It was just like such a nice thing to do, because when it comes to books, me and my mom never really read the same kind of books. The only thing that comes to mind is Harry Potter. She used to read me Harry Potter when I was a little kid, going to bed. And after Matthew died, I went downstairs and I told my mom Matthew died, and she was like, "Oh, I know." It was like this wholesome moment. I would talk to my mom and say like, I love how Anne has this imagination, and she would counter with a point like, oh, growing up on the farmstead, just reading Anne of Green Gables with her sisters and whatnot was this amazing moment for them. And it's like finding that bridge between my mom's younger self and me now, like where that kind of connectedness comes from. So yeah, I didn't think I would be liking this book as much. I just wish I had read this book earlier. I felt like I would have loved it even more than I could being a kid, maybe at my mom's age when I read it. It's a kid's book, is it not?
Yeah, like it's a kid's book for sure. It is, but it's interesting because at the time I don't even know if that was a thing. Like I don't know if young adult novels was a thing. Like I think that's more of a modern way of looking at things. I think at the time it was probably just published as a novel, much in the same way that I think, like David Copperfield or Oliver Twist was published as just novels.
Okay.
But like they're about adolescence and they're coming of age story. And
Yeah,
there are some pretty universal things about it.
No, I
absolutely adore this book. Just having this moment where me and my mom could bond over this book really meant a lot to me. Like just at the end, talking about characters and Gilbert Blythe, which my mom immediately mispronounced as Gilbert Blight, and I immediately loved that.
That's you bring up an interesting point. Did anyone else talk about the book with people in their acquaintances, like with people in your family or people that you know or friends or anything?
It's funny. I don't think my older sister probably has read it. But other than that, I actually haven't spoken to her. I actually would like to see if she has seen it or read it. I literally just finished it 2 days ago, so I actually haven't gotten a chance to talk to anybody about it. But I don't think anyone else in my family has read it. But if someone in my family has read it, it would be Allie. Allie for sure. My older sister would for sure have read it. But yeah, I haven't really gotten a chance to be able to discuss it with anybody. This is actually my first time discussing it with anybody.
Yeah, I'm sure you read it weeks ago, but you've been hiding it from everybody. You came home with a book in a paper bag, and your mom's like, "What's that?" It's like, "Oh, it's nothing. Leave me alone."
Doug, what about you?
I talked to my mother about it. She didn't have the same reaction. She literally just said, "Oh, I read that when I was young," and that was literally it. I talked to people at work about it, and there was only one person who responded in any more than just like, "Oh, that's interesting. That's a girl I work with, and she's red haired, and you could tell it meant something to her." And I guess, and I don't want to connect the two, but I'm just saying that the only woman that I met who showed any sort of excitement when I told her about it happened to have red hair. And so she was just like, she asked you, "What are you gonna?" I had just finished the novel that day when I was talking to her, and she asked, "Are you gonna read the next one?" And I said, "Yes, I have to, because Gilbert and what's it called, our friends. Marilla's going blind. Matthew died. I have to see what happens next."
Yeah, exactly.
And so I picked up the book and I've been reading it slowly.
So, do you call your coworker Carrots?
No. If I called her that, I'm pretty sure I would go to the HR.
She's break a slate over your head.
Yeah.
Probably.
I think for me, my mom, I don't think has read it, but my mom also didn't grow up in Canada, and I feel like she probably read different books when she was younger. The only people that I know that have read it are my partner and her sister, who I live with. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to read it so much, is because they keep talking about it. And I feel like there's a lot of inside jokes in their family about Anne of Green Gables. And I was okay, I have to be a part of this. So I'm excited. So yeah, they were pretty excited for me for reading it. And then when we watched the adaptation, we tried to make it into a big thing where we bought some current wine and drank a lot of current wine while we watched it. Not 3 tumbler fulls like fucking out of control Diana, but yeah. And to go to Doug's point, I definitely want to go to PEI after reading. It just the some of the passages about how she describes the place it's incredibly poetic, and it's definitely I can't imagine how much this boosted tourism for Prince Edward Island. I would imagine a lot, because this novel was like super popular when it came out. So yeah, I mean, I'm definitely in the same boat. Like, it's definitely something I wanted to visit.
PEI in a way becomes its own character in the book. And it's really strange, because whenever they reference Halifax or any of the other maritime provinces, they make them seem like sad and angry that only bad things happen over there. And then she describes Prince Edward Island, and she just describes it as this beautiful jewel of a land. And then the thing is even as Canadians, and I think even I've always thought of Prince Edward Island that way, and I think this book has entered into the minds of every Canadian, where we just believe that Prince Edward Island is that book, even if we haven't read the book. Because if you talk to any just general Canadian and you ask them, do you think Prince Edward Island is a nice place? They would probably just say, like, yeah, red cliffs, green grass, beautiful orchards, potatoes. That's
apple orchards. Yeah.
So like in my mind, I almost feel like the book has entered so much into Canadian, I don't know, idea, that it's kind of changed the way we even think about Prince Edward Island. And probably over the course of the past hundreds or so years, it probably has brought hundreds of millions of dollars, because Chinese or Japanese tourists go there yearly. It's like a weird pilgrimage.
Liz, my partner's sister, Liz was talking about someone that she knew that was from Prince Edward Island, and he was saying that, like, oh, everyone thinks Prince Edward Island is like Anne of Green Gables, and she's like, is it not? And he's like, no, like, it's nothing like that. And like, he had red hair. He's like, and she's like, okay. And then she's like, oh, well, what did you do at Prince Edward Island? And he's like, oh, like, my family owns an apple orchard. It's like,
yeah, you probably go to his house and you're like going through the most beautiful things ever. He's like, yeah, this is just total trash here. It's yeah, just don't worry about that shimmering lake over there.
The point I made when I introduced myself with, like, the adults in this book kind of being dicks, was, with the exception of Matthew and Marilla to an extent, although at first she was hard to like. For me personally, she was kind of hard to like at first. But you warm up to her by the end, obviously. But like Miss Rachel Lynde was horrible, just horrible. Yeah. And like the whole concept of adopting a child so that they can basically be your slave was also like, yeah, that's pretty messed up. That she was about to almost gave Anne to that other adult that was like, oh yeah, so you can raise my multiple sets of twins, like that.
Yeah, like, no. I also kind of love how ridiculous the adults are in the book, though, because it's so funny. Like, it's so incredibly hilarious just watching how, like, I almost feel like this could almost be like a parody of something that Charles Dickens would write. Like, there's just such abject, like, hatred towards children or something that's like happening throughout the book, that it's hilarious, that I'm just like, there's no way anyone can be like this. But like, having Anne like kind of fight that and spar with so many of those adults is also so great. And I think that's one of the things I like about this book. Like, in addition to just being a good book for girls to read, I think it's a good book for kids to read in general, because it's just refreshing reading a kid's book where a child is challenging authority so often. Like, I think that's just a good theme for children to grow up with. When she apologizes to Rachel Lynde, like, it's hilarious. It's absolutely hilarious to read. But also like her reaction to like every adult throughout the book is like, she treats them like a person and like doubts them and questions them. And like, a lot of the times the other adults are like, oh, you can't talk about adults that way. And in some cases, like her first school teacher, Mr. Phillip, which like, good Lord, didn't like, it took me a while to catch on to what was happening there. And then I was like, oh, he's a pedophile.
With Petty Andrews, right?
Yeah. I was like, with Prissy Andrews.
Oh, Prissy Andrews. Yeah.
I was like, oh, he's a file. Holy shit. And the first day that Anne's at school, she's like, oh, like, I don't like the way that I don't like the way that he looks at Prissy Andrews. Like, and Marilla's just like, oh, you can't question an adult. I'm like, the guy's a pedophile. Like, I think what you should be doing right now is calling up that school. Like, like, what's the matter with you?
Yeah, see, like, and when I was first reading it, I'm just like, so he's the headmaster and she's a 16-year-old girl. And I'm just like I'm just, as I'm reading it, I'm like, what the heck? Like, and I'm trying to, like, I was even trying to imagine, okay, so let's pretend this guy is fairly young, but like, as a headmaster at a school, how young could you possibly be? Like, and so, yeah, basically for a good portion of the book from there on, every time I heard every time they kept coming back to that story, every once in a while, I just cringe. You're like, oh, okay, whatever. That's it also goes to show like how different we view the world now, 100 and some years later. Like, I know that's no excuse. I'm just saying that, say 70 years ago, nobody reading that book would even cringe at that scene or those scenes or whatever. So I guess that's a good thing. Well, it is a good thing, but it just, that entire, that's the one part of the book that threw me off as I was reading it.
Because we did bring up Matthew and Marilla. I love Marilla's character. I agree what you said that it takes a while to warm up to her. I think she's probably also a character that when you look back on with time, you probably really come to admire. It's funny because Liz and Marcia were talking to me about this, and they said that when they were growing up, they always saw themselves as Anne, and now that they're older, they realize they're actually more like Marilla, which is hilarious because it's like, yeah, I could totally see that being true. Like, she just has no patience for anyone's bullshit, and it's just so great. One of my favorite parts that I bookmarked is there's a part when she first meets Anne. Anne's talking about her red hair, and she says something like, Did you ever know of anybody whose hair was red when she was young, but got to be another color when she grew up? No, I don't know as I ever did, said Marilla mercilessly. and I shouldn't think it likely to happen in her case either. And I was just like, that's brilliant. Like, I just love, like, and that's the other thing too, is the writing is so witty. It's just so well written, and it's just so funny.
You know, the thing, it actually saddened me at the end of this book, because there was because I know just the L.M. Montgomery's story, I know a little bit about it now. And I know about all the years she struggled to get this published. And really, it was only because she believed so much in this story and loved her character of Anne so much that she decided to go back and try to get it published years after she had originally written it. And then, of course, we're talking about perspective and talking about all this stuff. And it really affected me. I just imagine all of the not all the movies, all of the books written by women that were just as good or possibly even better that ended up in the trash can because nobody would listen to them. And I think, nowadays it is slightly different because people, minorities and women have voices and have outlets now that they can talk, but back then that simply wasn't the case. And so I just sit back and I think about all of the manuscripts that were thrown in the garbage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
And all of these amazing perspectives, like a win for the way we look at stuff now, because nowadays a good book written by whoever has a decent chance of being published, and it wasn't the case like that when she wrote this book.
With my mom, she has like a lot of her old school stuff, and she wrote a lot of poetry, but she never really did anything with it, right? It was like, oh, it's just all this old school stuff, and at her age, I couldn't have written this well, and so it makes me think because she went off to be an accountant, but a lot of my imagination and stuff I do think I got from my mom, because just going back and reading her stuff as a kid, it's so eerie the way we both viewed things, like overactive imagination and stuff. I think that's another reason why my mom liked me reading something she read as a kid. So I think that touches a point. I really do like Lucy Maud Montgomery's work here. I got some Tolkien-esque feeling from it. The way Anne's imagination. So she calls the big tree the Snow Queen, and I love that whole part. I just love how this kid's imagination took something in the real world and beautified it, but in a way a kid would. And the Lake of Shining Waters, I just love those names, and it just gave me such a nice feeling to see it put. Everything is so descriptive in the book, so I could see it and in my head in almost the way imagination presented itself.
But so yeah, any last points about the book we'll take.
I'm trying to think of any last points that haven't been brought up that we haven't talked about.
Did you know that Matthew was going to die when you were reading it?
Yeah, I did.
Oh yeah, sorry. This is the point where we spoil everything for our viewers.
Yeah.
Also, too, like it is 112 years old. So
It's true.
It's like, what?
Like all.
Yeah,
like,
I accidentally spoiled that for myself. I did accidentally spoil that for myself. I don't know what I was looking up, but I was looking something up on the internet about Anne of Green Gables and popped up and it was like, oh, yeah, Matthew dies. I'm like, oh, well, I mean, I'm not overly shocked based on what I've read so far. Like, I feel like that was like a natural way to go for this book to end.
As soon as it happened, I was just like punching walls in my apartment. I'm just like, what? I was like, oh, I can't. Why, Matthew? No, it's just such a sad ending. Like, it's like super happy of building the entire book, and then boom, the last 4 chapters, like chapter whatever is like the Reaper shows up or whatever it's called, and then it's like
laying in my bed.
The commentator was like reading off the names of the chapters, and so this whole time I'm getting in this like, oh, what misadventures are gonna befell this time?
And it's like
chapter 37, the Reaper whose name is Death. And I'm like, what is this, like a heavy metal album cover now? Like, I didn't want to believe Matthew was gonna die, but reading that chapter is like just like Yoda when he feels Order 66.
He's like, just that, like, oh my god, just hurts. And then yeah, so.
And also, like the last chapter, I think right before they kill him off, is this like immensely like poignant and like touching moment that he has with Anne. And I'm like, oh, he's gonna die for sure. And then you flip the page and it's like the Reaper whose name is Death. And I'm just like, good Lord. Yeah.
I feel like one day when I have kids, if I ever have kids, I would love the opportunity to sit down and read them, whether they're a boy or a girl. Like, because I think that there's some, like, I think anybody could take anything from this book if you read it and take a step back. And I really enjoyed it about the entire book.
I absolutely agree with you, Doug, because I think it's an important book.
I said in the intro that this is a movie club about movies adapted from books. Well, this is a movie, but it was made for TV by the Great Canadian Broadcasting Corporation in 1985, and it was adapted by Kevin Sullivan. Yeah, so the TV movie, I think it was really good. I actually started watching the anime from the 70s. For those who don't know, Anne of Green Gables is adapted by a Japanese animation studio. I don't remember what their name is. And it's all available on YouTube for free. So I started watching the anime first, I think while I was reading the novel. It's interesting because I really like the CBC adaptation. I really like the 1985 version. It's just strange because it's just, they obviously cut out a lot and they just kind of streamlined the adaptation a little bit more. So it's 3 hours long and they fit as much of the story in as possible. There's just like little things that I feel like move a lot quicker in the TV show than they did when I was reading it. And having watched the anime is almost a word for word adaptation. Like each episode is each chapter almost, and nothing happens in each episode. Like it'll like barely anything happens over the course of the episode. Like I think the Amethyst Brooch lasts for like is like a 2-episode arc or something. Like it like takes a really long time to resolve that scenario. So it was interesting watching the TV show and just seeing how like streamlined the adaptation is. I really enjoyed it. I thought the TV show was very accurate to the way to the way it was written. I think the cast was phenomenal. I definitely see why people love it so much and why they love Megan Follows as Anne Shirley so much. There's an interesting arc that Anne goes through over the course of the book. Is like she does start off as this like very naive adolescent, but by the end of it, she really does mature quite a bit. And to have an actress that can play both those roles, she does that very well. Like the Megan Follows at the end of that series versus the start of the series, you really do see how much she's grown and how much her character changes.
Yeah, I thought the adaptation was like a really good one, and like you said, like there was like obviously parts that were cut out, parts that felt streamlined. Like you said, like they took like 2 different chapters and like combined them into one. I remember her dyeing her hair green and not. What was the other part that was?
And I think the amethyst brooch and her dyeing her hair green were at the, or no, it was her dyeing her hair green and when she first meets Gilbert and he calls her Carrot.
Calls her Carrot.
Yeah. So like they you know mix 2 chapters together, and you can tell, and like it was for the most part, like I thought it was very like not even for the most part, I thought it was very well done in that regard. Like it did a really good job for it. The one thing that was the most different would have been her relationship with Gilbert Blythe, but overall, I think the movie is a very, very good adaptation. It hit all the notes that I was looking for in an Anne of Green Gables adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
I like everything you guys said. I found because the version that I watched was cut in 2. When I think it actually comes in was 1 and 2 parts.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought the first part I felt was really close to the book, and then the second part they kind of amalgamated so much of the book because, well, and the thing is you have to, right? Like I don't fault it for any creative decisions that end up making. The one thing I didn't like was the Gilbert storyline. For me, this book, Anne of Green Gables, and I haven't read any of the other books, admittedly, but this book was a family story of Marilla and Anne becoming a family, and then Anne's misadventures, and then in the book Gilbert Blythe, well, she doesn't even say his name for basically the entire book, and then at the end of the book, and they're finally like, well, let's be friends, sort of situation, and we'll start studying together. Like it gave the Marilla Anne a lot of room to breathe in the actual book, but I don't know. I just didn't like the Gilbert. They're really at a certain point in the adaptation TV series, they were really pushing this romance between the two, and it's not that I hated it. It's just that I kind of wish that they didn't in a way. But as I said, I don't know how you would do that otherwise, like creatively, if you're making this.
Yeah, I want to talk about that, but Jesse, why don't you give us your thoughts on the?
It was okay for the most part. It's just I find it hard to take the book, which is so descriptive in the environment that it's almost becomes magical, and translate that into live action. It's almost like it was just the backdrop, and like Doug said, you feel like PEI is almost like a character, right? And I did watch a couple of episodes of the anime, the one that you posted, Calvin. And I got that magic back because it's easier to do things with the animation style. Like you can add that magic literally. So again, it was okay. It's just I felt like something was lacking there, and I was just watching the adaptation. It wasn't like reading the book. And correct me if I'm wrong. Matthew's death is different.
Yeah, it's slightly different in the movie.
Yeah, he dies out in the field, much like Qui-Gon Jinn in Episode 1, where they're just looking at each other, and Matthew's got this lightsaber hole burnt through his chest. But like, I think Matthew's death in the book hits way harder because not a lot of people get the death of embracing someone the last time. It can just be like, you're here 1 second and you're gone, and that's exactly what happened with Matthew. It's that it was just there. The heart attack happened. He was just at the door frame reading the newspaper, right? And it was just like there, and it hits you differently.
He in the book he had just gotten the letter saying that the bank.
That's right. That the bank was foreclosing.
All their money's gone.
Yeah, all
my
the
money.
gone. It's just like, yeah,
It just had more of an impact in the book, reading the look on his face, and you're like, oh no, it's happening. Whereas he's out in the field and he's pulling the cow and like, he has the heart attack, and you kind of see, there's that long pause. Whereas in the book, I think it hits harder in the book than it did in the movie, but that's just my 2 cents.
I don't know. I don't know if I necessarily disagree. I did really like how they handled the death scene in the movie, though, because I think, but like I think that also just speaks to like how they portrayed Matthew in the TV show. I found him more likable in the TV show, and maybe that is just the fact of the actor's job. But yeah, it took me longer for me to warm up to him in the book and like understand that like, oh, like he is just this like really lovely, caring father figure, whereas in the TV show you feel that right away. So his death scene is super effective. But to go back to Doug's point about how they portray Gilbert, I do completely agree. I think what you said is interesting, and I never thought about it, but they do make the romance kind of the forefront, or they try to make it the forefront, certainly of part 2. Then and make it a much bigger part than it was in the book, because in the book, like really I almost don't see the romance being a thing at all. They are so distanced and there is no like real romance. I almost feel like it is so much a coming of age story, and it is so much a story about her family, that like there is no room for romance in there, like I think like she's so young that she's not thinking in those terms, and I think like, yeah, like forcing that into the TV show is kind of poor. Like I wasn't a big fan of it. I also just wasn't a fan of Gilbert in general in the TV show. He's a total asshole. Like some of the stuff, but like some of the stuff that he does, like and I don't know if it's in the book that he tugs on her hair. I'm like, dude, that is way out of line. Like, calm the fuck down. Like, he's like trying to get her attention and then pulls her braid and calls her carrots. Like, yeah, no, talk shit, get hit. Like I don't blame Anne one bit for cracking his head with a slate. Good on her. I just didn't like him. I just didn't like how much of a dick he was, and it's like because he likes her. I'm like, whatever. And I think like forcing that romance in the TV show is odd. And yeah, I think it's a thing where if you've read the rest of the books, that is a bigger plot point. Like there's a blossom romance between the two of them.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, but not in the first one. The first one is like it's strictly a coming of age book. And yeah, I just didn't think there was any room for that. It's yeah, I felt it was a little forced, to agree to Doug's point.
I agree with you. Like in the book, it isn't at the forefront, like a relationship, but I definitely like as soon as like that first chapter happens when they like kind of like develop that feud, I was like, I immediately, without any knowledge of anywhere the books go, I actually have no idea where the books go from this, but I was like, they're probably gonna like as adults, they're probably going to have a relationship. I definitely jumped to that conclusion because I just thought storytelling wise, I think that was where that relationship would likely end up going for some reason. But you're right, like it wasn't really necessary in the first. It wasn't in the first book, and therefore it wasn't really necessary in the miniseries that we watched.
Sure, like I agree. I know what you mean. It's like it's a storytelling perspective where you're like, I see where this is going. But like to put it into perspective, it would be the same as like if in the very first Harry Potter movie they were already developing a romance between Ron and Hermione. You'd be like, this is weird. Like,
right, exactly.
Like, to people who have read the series, it's like, yeah, there's a romance that develops down the line, but like,
spoiler alert.
Yeah, sorry to spoil Harry Potter and Anne of Green Gables for everyone, but
but also too, like as the perspective, and so sorry if I cut you off, but the perspective of the producers as well at CBC. Like it'd be hard to sell. It's like this is just a kids where there's no romance at all, and there's like, oh, by the way, there'll be two fairly good-looking leads as well. So I think as like just with the producer and like the 1985, They're
Yeah.
like, no, we're not producing this unless we have a romance unless we show a good portion of that blossoming romance or whatever. But I also disagree. I actually think that she, in the book, strangely enough, and her reaction to Gilbert, I think that she has, and this just goes back to her being a child. I think she immediately has a crush on Gilbert, and she has the crush over the course of the entire book. But as a child, you don't know how to show any of those emotions, and so that's why she didn't say his name. Even though, if you look at everything, they were actually kindred spirits, and she was always looking and excited about kindred spirits. And the person most kindred to Anne was Gilbert, but she refused to do anything about it or to be his friend, because I actually think that she had those feelings. She just didn't know how to like show them, I guess. And that's hard. That would like you can also have that in a movie, but it'd be super hard. You'd have to like have a lot of like
Internal dialogue.
Yeah, internal dialogue where they're just looking at each other with like, unsure of like
voiceover.
Yeah, with
What is this, Attack of the Clones? Like,
but no, sorry, that goes back to the book, and that's my general take on it. But yeah, and there's also the Netflix Anne with an E. Did anybody watch that?
I've not seen it yet. It's probably something I would watch eventually, but yeah.
Oh, well, sorry, everybody.
Yeah, it's first of all, just to go back to to Gilbert being her kindred spirit. Yes, possibly. But as far as I'm concerned, Anne has only one true love in this series, and it's Diana. Okay, like their friendship is like the absolute expression of love, as far as I can see. And that's another thing I thought that the TV show did like splendidly, is their relationship is hilarious, and it's so incredibly like touching to watch, and yeah, just like the moments that I know are iconic, and I know a lot of people have talked to me about it, and like the episode with the cordial and the currant wine is like super funny, and like that performance and their chemistry in those scenes is so good. And I just love Marilla's like reaction to the whole thing, and just saying like, well, like maybe if your child had some self-control and didn't drink 3 tumblerfuls of cordial, she'd be okay. The book in and of itself was hilarious, but like the TV show did a really good job of adapting how ridiculous some of those scenes are. Especially also the other one that always comes to mind is when they have to part, or when like Diana's mother prevents them from seeing each other and they have to say goodbye to each other. And it's just the most dramatic scene in the book and in the TV show too. It's just the most dramatic possible thing, and it's like they're still going to see each other. Like they still see each other at school. It's just it's just
they
so
wave at each other like,
yeah.
Bye.
It's so incredibly dramatic, and I love that. Like that's one thing I love so much about this. Like I said at the start, that it's such a calming book to read because there's so little conflict. When there is conflict, it's melodramatic and it's ridiculous, and that's what's so good about it. Is it's just so fun.
Yeah.
Another thing I really liked that we didn't touch on was like the whole child being sick, like the with the croup and stuff like that. And I can't even remember what the I really like that scene in both the book and the adaptation. It kind of switches everything for her, because it kind of felt like Anne was always an outsider and people looked down on her. And then after that happened in both the book and the adaptation, it kind of switched where everybody looked at her differently and talked about Anne Shirley differently. And I did like that as well.
There is a dramatic shift in how you see her character, that like she is this like extremely capable young woman and not just this like whimsical child. Yeah. One other thing, I think the actress that plays Rachel Lynde is also really good in this. Like she's equally like despisable, but also so despisable that it's funny. Like every time she shows up at the house, like Marilla's reaction to her and like the fact that she has to deal with her again is just is so hilarious. But one of my favorite lines that she says is at the end of the show. I think like it might even be like one of the very last lines of the entire thing, but it's like it's after Matthew dies and decides to stay at Green Gables and not go to college and teach at the school and stuff. And she's like talking to them about what her plans are, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I'm going to teach at the school." And she's like, "Oh, and you're not going to and you're not going to continue your education?" And she's like, "No, like I'm still going to take correspondence courses and try to finish it that way." And and Rachel's just like, "You're going to do all that while you're teaching at the school?" And Anne's like, "Yep, I'm totally capable. I can do this." And she walks away. And then Rachel's just like so disapproving of the fact that she's doing both those things at the same time. She turns to Marilla and she literally says, "Well, she's going to kill herself in the end, Marilla." Just like, what the hell?
No confidence.
Yeah.
When I just started reading Anne of Avonlea, the part 2, and there was a funny part in that where Marilla and Anne were talking, and she walks upstairs, and they're talking about Rachel Lynde, and they say, "You know what? If we went upstairs, closed the door, and sneezed to ourselves, the next day Rachel Lynde would be at the doorstep wondering if we have a cold or something."
Yeah.
And I actually burst out laughing when I read that, and I just read that like the other day.
Yeah.
And then the thing we didn't talk about that was definitely my favorite scene of the entire book was when Matthew goes to go pick her up a dress for Christmas.
Yeah.
And when I was reading that chapter and just howling, like it was the funniest thing to me. And they did do it in the book, but I kind of wish that they had done it originally, how it was written, where instead he just left with his 20 pounds of
with his 20 pounds of brown sugar. Yeah.
And then he went to Rachel Lynde and she figured it out. But anyways, I just that was my favorite chapter and my favorite scene of both things that we did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I actually had that written down. Was the scene in the book is hilarious, but they did it really well on the TV show too. Is just him buying 20 pounds of sugar and then coming home with 20 pounds of and it's just Marilla like haphazardly baking in the kitchen, being like, "Well, 20 pounds of sugar."
like
Oh yeah, no, Rachel Lynde though. I cannot stand that character.
I know, it's so
annoying,
so ridiculous. Sure, but like it really probably does speak a lot about small town life. I never grew up in a small town, so I don't know. But like, there's so many of those in Canada, and I imagine Prince Edward Island probably has a lot of those too. And I'm sure for people who are watching or reading the book, they almost certainly know a Rachel Lynde. Like they almost certainly grew up with a woman like that or a person like that, and we're like, "Oh my god, like I know exactly who this character is." Yeah, no, yeah, Anne of Green Gables. I think if we were to pick which one we liked more, it's a hard one to say. I would probably pick the book just because of how descriptive it was, and yeah, like a lot of that.
I like the book.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think I definitely like the book more.
Yeah, I picked the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely the book for me.
Yeah.
Same.
Cool. So we'll call that a wrap on Anne of Green Gables. Thank you for listening. I really need to work on outros.
We didn't.
Oh yeah, we'll talk about so the next. Oh yeah, we got to pick our wrestlers to play in our Anne of Green Gables adaptation. So yeah, if we were to adapt this in current day, who would we cast, and how many of them would be professional wrestlers?
The obvious answer to Anne of Green Gables, it would have to be portrayed by Becky.
Yeah, I knew you were gonna say Becky Lynch, and I was like,
Vince McMahon plays Matthew. That's what I'd have.
Oh yeah. just so out of character for him too. It's just for him to play this extremely pleasant, lovely old man, just trying to raise Becky Lynch. Yeah, I love it.
Person in professional wrestling.
Yeah.
You know what? I do wish the WWE would adapt it because it would be be a garbage fire, and I'd be totally worth watching. So.
It's true. If Becky Lynch plays Anne, then Seth Rollins would have to play Gilbert Blythe.
I wanted to make a joke about the whole thing with like Matthew losing his Money in the Bank match, but
yeah. So do your outro, and
I guess what we will say is the next book that we've picked is Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, which I'm excited for. And we will be watching the Netflix miniseries as the adaptation for it. Yeah, and that's Page and Screen, folks. Special thanks to me and my friend for creating all the music you hear on the show. If you think I'd love to hear more of their music, well, you can by visiting meandmyfriend.bandcamp.com. Go ahead and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. It's a great way to support the show. As well, please leave us a review and a rating. Also, feel free to connect with us on social media. We are at Page and Screen 1 on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can also search Page and Screen on YouTube, where you can watch a video version of this show. We post regular updates of all the books we read and all the movies we watch, and we would love to hear your thoughts on all of them. We're not the only ones who can offer our unwarranted opinions, so chime in and join the conversation. And finally, make sure you spread the word about this show. If you know a book nerd or film geek in your life, please pass it on. We would love to reach them. Maybe you have a bosom friend of your own. Listen to this together, trade notes. Until the next Page and Screen, thank you for listening.